These are my thoughts directed towards newer resellers who are using YouTube as a resource to learn more about the craft or trade or business or whatever you want to call it. I am a creature of YouTube. Obviously, you're watching me on YouTube, but before I even had a channel, I lived on YouTube, still live on YouTube. I put in way beyond my 10,000 hours of mastery in watching reselling YouTube and YouTube in general. So these are my thoughts of how to use reselling YouTube as a resource that will actually be useful for you and make you money and optimize your learning process as a new reseller, because there are a few significant pitfalls to look out for. One of the biggest perils with reselling YouTube is channels overstating or overhyping the good parts of reselling and downplaying the negatives. Reselling, if you do it more than a couple hours a day, is a slog, sometimes a brutal slog. It is not always pleasant. Even the fun parts of it, like sourcing, can be a little bit of a burden, sometimes a lot of a burden. Thrifting takes a psychological toll. As much as I love it, as much as I've dedicated my entire life to it, sometimes when you're sourcing, you're standing in the middle of a Goodwill with tweakers chattering their teeth at you, feeling vaguely depressed. It's 4 p.m. You have a headache. It does exact a toll. So it's not all glory times. Even if you don't thrift, even if you're going garage sailing, you can get into fights. You can have negative stuff happen to you. All of that is covered on YouTube as well. It's important to know about the highs and to also be as intimately familiar with the lows and have both of those temper each other in terms of your expectations of what reselling is going to bring you and how enjoyable it's going to be. If you are watching all of these videos that are the big blockbuster finds of someone getting a crate full of Super Nintendo games at a garage sale for 10 bucks, those are great fun to watch. Those people aren't making it up, probably. It's probably not staged. That's probably real, and stuff like that does happen. But if those are your expectations going into a thrift store or a garage sale, that you're going to knock it out of the park more often than not, it's simply not going to help you. It's going to discourage you. And you need to be aware that this is work, first and foremost, beginning, middle, and end. It is a grind, and not in the hustle, let's get this money grind way. It's a grind, as in metal on metal, gears crushing your skull sometimes. It's brutally hard work at times. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, and I don't want to pitch it too negative, but if you're anticipating being this wunderkind out of the gate and having great things happen for you, then that you should not look at reselling in that way. And that's a consequence of people wanting clicks, which is going to be a recurring theme here. The flip side of that coin of overhyping the positives of reselling is overhyping the dangers of reselling. So I think I have observed that this is a phenomenon that crops up mostly in channels that are pretty big and have been around for a long time. And I imagine making content becomes a stretch after a certain point. You run out of things to say. You can only make so many videos about how to ship. You can only make so many videos about whether or not to offer free returns, or you don't want your channel just to become a perpetual cycle of haul videos and what's sold videos. So you leap on opportunities to talk about things that are new and different, current events that happen in the reselling world. This usually takes the form of salacious videos talking about policy changes at eBay or policy changes with the IRS that get the clickbait treatment, and a relatively minor issue gets inflated into the sky is falling, the world is ending, or business is done. You might as well dig your own grave now. And that's too bad, because as a new reseller, you're going to be quite sensitive to that if you're anything like me. I was Chicken Little for a long time. I kind of a little bit still am. I will say, it's, especially as a full-time reseller, it's not a comforting experience all of the time. You are this little sailboat adrift on this raging sea of changing, shifting circumstances in terms of your finances and your standing with these reselling platforms, and a tidal wave can come in and hit you and take out your whole business at any time. Or at least that's how it sounds. And especially when you have salty old sea dogs telling you horror stories in the tavern before you set sail, it's not comforting. And even though all of those things are real that they're talking about, it does not psychologically benefit you to do reselling with this attitude and this disposition of the walls are closing in all the time and I'm going to be left out to hang high and dry and I have no control over it. That is technically the case. That is true. We live in a free market system that is driven by absolute chaos. And we live in this honeycomb of bureaucracies and policies that are living on a governmental level and on a corporate level with these companies that control our destinies like eBay and Poshmark and Amazon. And it's all out of our hands, and we are downstream of any change that happens at any level of that ladder, that infinitely tall ladder of policy complexity. And there's a lot of homework to be done there too. A small mistake can compound into fines and fees and perils. And that's not a reassuring way to live life. I find it deeply personally unpleasant and repugnant. And for someone to come along and poke that hornet's nest and to kind of exploit that feeling that you have, I think is not a good thing to do. I understand why people do it, and people have different motivations. Some of them are just full-blown poor intentions. They just want the clicks. They want to make you feel afraid, so you click the video. And they'll title it something like, "Huge policy change for eBay. Every reseller must know this." And you watch the video, and it turns out it's like, oh, there's a 5% increase in final value fees for like antique dolls. Who cares? There's a lot of that going on. There are also better intentioned people who are just very thoroughgoing and want to keep their viewers appraised of changes in terms of eBay's TOS or tax policies or whatever the case may be. All of this stuff is stuff that you need to know, but you can't let it get under your skin. I've been doing reselling for about 4 years now, and there has always been some scandal afoot. eBay is always doing something slightly askew. The IRS is always kind of changing the field of play in some subtle way. Not always, but that does happen from time to time. The post office raises their fees, and it's always a moving target. Stuff is always in flux. And a relatively small issue, when it's dropped in your lap and framed like that of you're screwed, it can feel like a punch to the gut. It can really send you running for the hills, and it shouldn't. Every little fire that has cropped up, especially on eBay over the whole time that I've been doing reselling, has been quietly snuffed out. It hasn't had a significant impact on my business. There are certain things that happen that are a bigger deal than others. Like there was a big kerfluffle when it seemed like resellers were going to have to tabulate their tax, their local sales tax for every single state that they sold goods in. And it wound up being the case that there was a Supreme Court decision that the reselling platforms themselves would have to remit those taxes on behalf of the resellers. So in that instance, the sky was preparing to fall, but it didn't, thankfully. That was cause for concern. The $20 fee for the returns, I'm sorry. People who are rattling their sabers and saying that they're going to quit eBay, maybe they know something that I don't, but this seems like the case of people being overreactive and salacious and wanting the clicks. I could be wrong. But don't turn molehills into mountains. Don't let other people convince you that molehills are mountains. eBay has been around. It's going to be around. Reselling has been around. It's going to be around. And if the trapdoor opens beneath your feet, then yeah, you will have to cope with that circumstance, and don't be totally passive. Don't just throw your hands up and say, I don't have to plan for the future at all. I don't have to plan for poor contingencies that might come up. But also don't huddle up in the corner and shiver and say, well, it was nice while it lasted, but clearly the seas are boiling over and I need to get out now while I still can. Don't think that way. Another word of caution is to take everything with a grain of salt. And it's not because people are lying to you. It's because people have biases and ideological blinders that they're not aware of, including me. And these arise just from the experience of reselling. Everybody has a different approach to reselling. It's the same with anything. I mean, to use fishing as a metaphor, which I think is a great metaphor to use universally for reselling. I know people who have been fishing their entire lives, and every single one of them, even though they are master anglers, have radically different approaches to angling. Even down to the way they hold a rod in their hand will be different. And the same is true of reselling. You can't do reselling universally following one specific policy or set of policies and dispositions and have it be universally useful for everybody. And I've talked about this in recent videos. So take everything with a grain of salt and don't impute bad motives to people where they aren't there. For the most part, I think people are well-intentioned on reselling YouTube and they're trying to help. But you have to hold each piece of information that you are given in a little bit of circumspection and test it against your own experience and make sure that it makes sense in terms of how you are approaching reselling. If someone gives you a piece of information and you're not totally clear on the context that surrounds that information, in terms of you don't know what the person's general business model is, you don't know what their sourcing methodology is, you don't know why they consider something a good policy or not, or if they don't properly explain it that thoroughly, and if it's in conflict with things that you've consistently heard elsewhere or that you feel from your own experience to be the truth. You should pay attention to that information because it might be superior information to whatever you're operating on, but you should also be circumspect about it and skeptical and test it against your own experience. Kind of a similar note, I think it's a bad idea to get too attached to any one particular reseller when it comes to their policies and their advice. I watch everyone. A lot of people I watch a lot more than other people, but I watch everyone and I have watched everyone. The people that I started watching when I started reselling, I typically don't really pay that close attention to anymore, but they were the ones that were popular and available at the time, and I learned a tremendous amount from them. A lot of these people I don't particularly enjoy watching anymore. Their personalities rub me the wrong way, and I have questions about some of their business practices. It doesn't necessarily make sense for what I'm doing now. But I still occasionally watch them, and I'm glad that I did watch them, even though I moved away from them, because I learned so much, and everybody does have something to offer. You should draw water from all sources that you can. Because reselling is enormously complicated and complex, and nobody knows everything, and these are cliches, but they're true. Nobody has the keys to the kingdom. Nobody knows everything. Everybody can contribute some missing part of your game that you perhaps couldn't get from anyone else, except for Gary Vaynerchuk. This might be a little redundant with things that I've already said, but anybody that says that reselling is easy money or that something in reselling is easy money should probably be taken with more than one grain of salt. Doesn't mean that there's no such thing as easy money. I consider video games easy money. But for the most part, 99% of reselling, even the stuff that's relatively easy, is still hard work. I guess the big note here is don't succumb to grass is greener mentality, because especially as a new reseller, you do hop around from lily pad to lily pad in terms of business model. The temptation is really strong just to change your horse in midstream all the time and try something else. And it's hard to say don't do that, because it's a really important part of the learning process of settling on what it is that you actually want to do with reselling. But don't allow that to become a pathology. Don't allow that to become the driving pattern behind your business, because after a while, you need to close your mouth. You need to settle on some thing that you want to eat for dinner. You can't just be getting the free samples from Baskin-Robbins for an hour. Also keep in mind that a lot of advice people are going to give you will be directly contradictory. It doesn't mean that one is correct. It means that it's correct by that person's standards and that person's judgments for their business model. And you need to understand holistically everything about that claim to be able to evaluate it on its merits or lack of merits. So I got a piece of advice early on from a YouTuber in one of their videos saying the worst thing that you can possibly do as a new reseller is to niche up and get domain expertise in one specific reselling niche. Specifically, don't become an expert at men's used clothing because it's oversaturated, it's too hard, and too many people are doing it. It's too popular on YouTube. You're never going to be successful. And of course, that wound up being complete BS, but it wasn't BS for him. In his experience, in his mind, that was a true statement. It made sense. He had experiences that caused him to feel that way for probably good reason. And it was the right piece of advice for someone, but not for me. And of course, this does only extend so far. If somebody is telling you to resell dog turds, it's not like they're just living their truth. That is a bad piece of information. There is such a thing as bad advice. But you should evaluate advice based on the quality and thoroughness of the advice and the amount of homework it appears has gone into arriving at that conclusion. These knee-jerk ad hoc recommendations based not on experience, but based on what other people have said, based on guesswork, or based on what people want to be the case, that can be discarded pretty easily. My final thought is take advantage of YouTube because it is a truly phenomenal resource and it can carry you over the finish line. It can bring you from 0 to 60. You don't necessarily need tutoring. You don't necessarily need to pay for digital products. Those things can help. But if you want to bootstrap it and just go on people's free information that they've put out there, there's so much of it that you can do really serious damage. So take advantage of YouTube. It's a truly great resource. You have to be slightly cautious of other people's judgment. You shouldn't take anything anybody says on here as gospel because we're all just some guy or some girl who is talking into a camera. Hope this helps. Thanks for watching.